Good morning, everyone. My name is Zena Ajos. I am the Deputy Director of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. Thank you for joining us today. Our topic is immigration and your workplace, what New Hampshire businesses and nonprofits need to know. We have a very capable and experienced panel with us today, and I want to give as much time for you to ask your questions and get to them. Before I do so, I just wanted to thank our sponsor, Kennebug Savings, for this series. And I'll introduce with brief bios. I'll start with Emily White, an immigration attorney with Reno. Emily's focus is on representing companies, organizations, and individuals in a broad range of immigration matters. She assists clients in managing the visa needs of foreign workers, obtaining non-immigrant and immigrant professional visas, applying for employment-based and family-based permanent residence, and achieving naturalization. She also represents non-citizens facing removal before the immigration court in all levels of appeal. And we have SangYeob Kim, the senior staff attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of New Hampshire. His work focuses on individuals' statutory and constitutional rights in deportation proceedings and interpretation of the Refugee and Torture Convention in domestic federal courts. He was previously an adjunct clinical immigration law professor at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. And last but not least, we have Rick Minard, the executive director of Building Community in New Hampshire. Rick has been serving as the executive director since 2018. He has 45 years of experience in managing nonprofits and a career that started as a reporter in Keene, New Hampshire, worked on the staff of U.S. senators, governors, and lots of environmental and social initiatives. And I want to start here. I want to just some rules, please. If you have any questions, we have a Q&A function and we have chat. Feel free to send your questions to the host directly. If you want to send it anonymously through Q&A, you can as well, or share any resources in chat. I want to start first with Rick to set the scene and tell us about immigrants in New Hampshire. And I'm hoping you could see your slides.
Not yet.
Okay, good. And I'll hand it over to you, Rick.
Okay, thanks. I'm still seeing the title page.
Okay.
But good morning, everybody. I'm Rick Minard, Executive Director at BCNH, which is part of the refugee resettlement community in New Hampshire. We're an organization that was originally founded by refugees from Bhutan. The slides aren't up yet.
I'll stop sharing.
And that's all right. And we focus primarily on people who have come to New Hampshire as refugees. There we are. You'll see, this is our staff. We're a group of seven full-time people. Deputy Director Vijay Bujel on the left, originally from Bhutan. Lilia Mayevsky, originally from Ukraine. Eric Irakiza, originally from Democratic Republic of Congo. Katerina Nazarova, recently from Ukraine. Kenley Jacks, recently from Haiti. And Hussein Amiri, 8 years ago from Afghanistan. So these folks know what it means to be refugees. And they work directly with the major refugee or immigrant groups in New Hampshire right now. Next slide, please. I thought it might be useful to show you a little bit about what I know about who's here. Over the last 2 years, we've enrolled some 300 or 400 people in our programs. We are not the only group doing this work, and we primarily are enrolling people who have come as refugees or with official government status, with documentation. And that's the world I know. I'm not comfortable splitting immigrants into legal and illegal or documented and undocumented. But our business, our organization really does focus primarily on people who are here with the government's blessing. And the rest of the world is not so well known to me. But at the bottom of this table, that group, the blue group, are originally from Democratic Republic of Congo. They came as refugees. The yellow group are people who are recently from Bhutan. The pale blue are refugees from Myanmar, Rohingya, who are here as refugees. And there are a handful of others. But that big group, that wave of orange, they're people from Ukraine. They did not come to the United States as refugees. They came as humanitarian parolees. And they do not have permanent status here in the United States yet. Nor does the next group up. Those are people from Afghanistan who came largely as humanitarian parolees and whose position here is still a bit tenuous. And on top of that, the green group are people who are here from Haiti, the most recent large group of people who have come to the United States with temporary protected status. All of those people have, or should have, or may have, employment authorization documents, and may be in your workforce. They have a right to work in New Hampshire. They have Social Security numbers and they pay taxes. And yet, the orange, gray, and green groups are feeling quite threatened right now, and they need your support in particular. Next slide. People work. They got to work. They need money. They need to support their families and pay their rent. And a lot of what we do as an organization is help them find jobs. The resettlement agencies, the International Institute of New England, Century Care Alliance, and another ethnic community group like ours, Overcomers Refugee Services in Concord, we're all helping people get jobs or get a better job. And with the newest people in the United States, helping them understand what it means to be in the workforce here. And this table just shows our data from the last couple of years, 4 years. About 300 people, most of them have gone into manufacturing. They're working at a handful of firms that are experienced hiring refugees and other immigrants, or direct service, home health care, nursing homes, and providing care to individuals. Then there's a scattering of other occupations. Some professionals. Some of the people who come to the United States as refugees or with temporary protected status have advanced degrees and are doing amazing work. But the majority of people who have come that we see are relatively well, not unskilled, but they have less formal education and much less English. And that puts them it makes it challenging for them to find work, keep work, but they're providing a really important part of the state's workforce. And you as employers may have some of them on your staff, and you know more about their particular needs than I do. Next slide. Here's what I think you can do to support them right now. They are threatened, particularly people from Haiti, even from Ukraine, and even from Afghanistan. They need your support, emotional and official. I say, don't panic. They're here. Keep employing them. Don't lay them off. Don't think that they are somehow a risk to you as an employer. I hope I can say that with confidence. The people I'm talking about have their employment authorization documents. Keep them. I can't give you much advice about people who don't have that documentation. I'm sure my colleagues will. But please don't lay them off. And keep hiring them. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm here from Haiti with temporary protective status, I need a job, feel confident that you can hire them. But you've got a political role to play. it's there. The when the president when Trump was in office 5 years ago, he essentially closed down the refugee program, as he is doing right now. And he said there will be no refugee resettlement in states or cities unless the governor of those states and the mayors of those cities write a letter to the federal government affirming that they want refugee resettlement. They have to say yes. I want you to make sure that your governor and your mayors say yes. The BIA, I think, can be very helpful in lobbying the state in the legislature to support refugee resettlement. Uh, and you, as business leaders, have a direct role to play through direct contact. So you are not passive, helpless entities here as business owners, as HR directors. Let the powers that be know that refugees and immigrants are an important part of your workforce. I'll leave it now to my colleagues to talk more about the legal issues.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you so much for inviting us. And I am grateful that I'm with Attorney Emily White because she's really the expert in this area more than I do when it comes to profit and nonprofit entities. So I'm gonna start a little bit explaining what we are trying to do, and then I hope that I can ask some questions to Emily so that Emily can and then lead Emily to answer and to provide you all the information that you need. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post that questions in the question box. So we are not here to scare you. Obviously, we are here to empower you. However, the reality can be very harsh in this climate. So we hope that you understand what is really happening, what are your rights that you can exercise. That does mean that you're required to do. However, the knowing the rights are pretty important because especially as an employers, because your employees can be right now scared, but without actually talking to you. We get a lot of calls even from naturalized citizens that they are scared. I got a call from recently naturalized citizen and lawful permanent resident who should not be scared under the law because there's nothing that, under any circumstance, but they are still scared. So that's where, how Rick said, your role as an employer can be pretty important because you're really it. You are the one who can empower them. You can stand with them so that they don't have to be scared. And for that, I think it would be important to know what are the rights that people can exercise as an employer and as employees. So what has really changed? So I think the kind of one critical point is the elimination of the sensitive location. So previously, immigration authority or not under the policy were not allowed to go into churches, hospitals, or in schools, and other places that we naturally think that they are sensitive locations. Now that has been eliminated. Now, does that mean that all ICE officers are required to go in there? No, it kind of gives some discretion to each office. However, and here's the next point. There is significant pressure on ICE officers in each office to make the quota. So it's my understanding that recently the administration reassigned the leadership of ICE in DC because they were upset with the fact that the leadership could not make the quota. That's very frustrating because it's even within I'm trying to for the sake of fairness, I'm trying to understand how this quota could be made within a month. But in any event, the ICE leadership has been replaced with some other. I don't know the details, but that's how much that we are encountering this significant pressure on ICE officers, and also we are seeing that it's more visibility of ICE enforcement. So for example, under the Biden, even under like during Trump 1.0, For example, there are officers who did not carry guns. They were not masked. They were not with bulletproof, but they went to and then successfully detained people without status or in certain circumstances. Now it appears that depending on office, but ICE officers are. I also confirmed this with a photo that like with a mask on, with a bulletproof, with a rifle arm, pointing gun at person to arrest a person. And then to arrest a person, for example, like 9 officers coming in and then point the guns at just one person. So it kind of shows a very high profile arrest and you try to increase the number through the quota. And another thing that we may see in New Hampshire in the future, we don't know as of now, is there might be some demand of the collaboration between local law enforcement and ICE officers to increase the arrest numbers and the visibility. Now, a lot of things are uncertain right now, but that's how we are seeing for the climate. So, Emily, so what are the kind of specific ICE actions that we can expect to see when it comes to profit or nonprofit entities?
So I think the first point you mentioned is just that we can expect them to be more present and more visible. And that obviously has impact just in terms of owners, employees, customers noticing that there's an ICE van outside and how that in of itself interrupts business and makes employees anxious. So I think an acknowledgement that ICE will be more visible, somewhat more emboldened to be present in places and making themselves known is in and of itself going to have an impact in our state. And we've already seen that. We've seen that in Concord, we've seen that in Keene, we've seen that in Manchester. I think that will grow. I think in terms of ICE actions that agents are planning to carry out at businesses, organizations, maybe nonprofits, schools, hospitals, after-school program, is arrests of individuals at the organization. Whether they seek to arrest them in the public spaces outside, like parking lots or even in lobbies, or whether they're going to try to go into the private areas of businesses. I think probably both will happen. I think that there may be a return to raids. So I haven't seen raids in a long time. I've practiced immigration law for over 15 years. And out west, I had a few experiences with raids at like large dairies, call centers in Texas, where ICE agents would come in and request that larger, maybe at a manufacturing plant, employees separate themselves, or maybe with the cooperation of owners or supervisors, separate into status by US citizen, permanent residents, those authorized to work or those who will self-identify as not having authorization to work, and then make arrests based on those self-identification or identification with the help of others at the place of work. So we may see a return to ICE raids. And then finally, the last type of action that I think will increase is notice of inspection. And that's where ICE goes to a business or an organization with a notice of inspection for a request for all I-9s. So that's the employment verification form for all hires. And with that serves a subpoena for other documents related to all employees on payroll, all owners. I mean, there's a series of documents that they request be provided with the I-9s. We can talk about sort of those processes in more detail. But I think those are the categories of enforcement actions. And then I think we'll probably see many hybrids where somebody goes to serve a notice of inspection, but then also apprehends an individual. And so we're unclear which category this falls in.
Great, thanks so much, Emily. So I'm trying to be kind of helpful to the audience, kind of imagining, just conceptualize like what it really means in reality, in practice. So, I can imagine that kind of, ICE officers, a lot of times without any like mark as ICE, but then with the police, kind of going to the like business, for example, like YMCA in Manchester, I'm only mentioning because that's usually where I go, like, for swimming and workouts. So I can kind of easy for me to visualize it. So, kind of ICE officers going to the, like, opening the door, which is not locked, and they go to the reception, and then, whether ICE officer would like further go into the facility, like passing that kind of the initial bar where the members could go in or not. And what are the things that like ICE officers would carry, whether they would even show any document to come in, identify themselves as ICE officer. So could you explain about like this scenario and what are the documents that ICE officers may carry and may not even carry?
Yeah, and so that's a question, is whether ICE officers are going to be more in the masks, in the bulletproof vests. That's what I've seen of recent, and really announce their presence as ICE officers. At the most recent workplace enforcement action of Monday, that's how the officers came, with bulletproof vests and with masks. But that same officer had been in the establishment just days prior, having a drink at the bar. So, right, they're going to shift how they're presenting at the organizations. But if they've come to announce that they are there to do an ICE enforcement action, then ideally they have identification with them. My experience has been that they don't willingly provide that. They don't, have their name very visible, that has to be asked for, but they have it somewhere. And then they should have, or may have, a document that says they have the authority to be there. The extent to which that document actually gives them authority varies. Most of the time they have an administrative warrant. And it's called a warrant, but it's not really a warrant. It's a document that's created by their own agency. So it's addressed to an immigration officer and it's signed by an immigration officer. And then so I have a sample here. We can include them in the materials. But it says that they believe that they have reasonable cause that an individual might be removable from the United States. And it's titled with Department of Homeland Security. That is not a warrant that satisfies the Fourth Amendment. It's really a request. So if ICE is using that and saying, I have a warrant, I'd like to go into your back spaces, the place where you should have a reasonable expectation of privacy, this ICE administrative warrant that they provide isn't sufficient. It's not sufficient to violate or to go beyond your reasonable expectation of privacy in the back part of your business. Another document that they could have is they could have a judicial warrant. They could have gone to a judge and said, I think that this person should no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the back part of their business because we have reasonable cause to go beyond and breach that expectation of privacy due to individuals who are present, individuals who are being harbored. And if they have a judicial warrant, it has the name of the court on the top, and then it's actually signed by a judge. So those are the two primary documents that would purport to be a warrant. One of them is, and one of them isn't enforceable.
Great. Emily, how about those kind of gray area where the line between public and private is somewhat not clear? So, obviously if there's a door inside of the building, after the door, that's private, like if the door can be locked. But but then kind of between, for example, kind of space between the front door, which is always open, kind of reception area, private area. Does that really matter in terms of like ICE kind of approaching, ICE demanding, ICE kind of showing the document, and in terms of the level of privacy?
Well, so my recommendation, I've been talking with, it's surprising how many, I guess it's not surprising, but it's a change how many organizations have reached out and said, I'd like to create a policy. And those vary from after school programs, hospitals, private businesses, about what to do if ICE arrives. And in part of preparing for that policy, I talk about where are your public spaces where I could just walk in, and where could I not go And is that clearly demarcated within your establishment? And most places it's not, because we're friendly, right? And to have like private, do not go beyond, seems a little aggressive. I think that people should consider having clear signs that say no authorized personnel beyond this point, so that it's clear that yes, this lobby space, anyone may be able to enter, but beyond there, you would need to demonstrate that you have authorization to go. ICE in those public places, the lobby, can contact an individual, might be able to execute a specific objective, but ICE can't come into your lobby and start just canvassing everyone, what's your immigration status, just as they shouldn't do that on the sidewalk. So there's, even in those public places, there's limitation to what an ICE officer could do. And then there's also always the ability to say, this is a disruption to my business. Please leave, just as you could do with any member of the public.
Great. So since we are talking about the policy, on top of the point that you just mentioned about the line between private and public, what other things that the policy could have to help out entities?
So I'm recommending a written policy. I'm recommending a written policy for several reasons. One is it's a written policy you could share with concerned employees about what would happen if ICE came. It may be helpful to say, we have a written policy, and I think that policy protects our employees from fear and from being questioned unreasonably. I think it also helps the person who might have that first interaction with an ICE agent to say, I have a written policy, and so I have to abide by it. It's not that I don't want to help you, it's that I can't without my job being at risk. And it also, puts that person in a position of knowing who they contact, because that's my first recommendation in that policy, is that written policy should be titled as a protocol for responding to ICE enforcement on business or organization premises, something like that. It can be brought out, and that should clearly state who is the point of contact, who's able, to respond to the ICE agent. Probably one or two people, so that if that first one's unavailable. Also, often an attorney contact, if you have one available, who could be called to maybe look at the document to see, is that truly a judicial warrant? Two, could verify the ICE agent's credentials. I do worry in these times of individuals purporting to be ICE who aren't ICE at all. So I often say that when an ICE officer calls me, as I ask, even though they're calling me at my law firm, I want some confirmation that this is actually an ICE officer that I'm about to give information to. And then response for if it is an administrative warrant. And there are many samples out there from school districts, from hospitals right now, about how forceful to be about that. I've seen school district policies that say, in no circumstances do we consent to an administrative warrant being used as justification to enter the areas where we have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Some have sort of a middle ground. But I would have a response that says what you're going to require. And many are requiring a warrant signed by a judge for lots of good reasons. And then if that is the case, then the person who's holding up the policy can say, I'm sorry, my employer has made clear that I cannot let you pass this point without a warrant signed by a judge. If you were to return tomorrow with a warrant signed by a judge, which probably they don't have the ability to do, but I'll gladly let you beyond, right? So that clear line should be in the policy if that is the position that the organization wants to take. And then the policy should also address if there is a judicial warrant. And that beyond there is really recommendations, but it's recommendations that the person can use in negotiating, discussing with the ICE agent. So is there an area for requested action? So if it's going to be a single individual who's going to be brought to the ICE agent, rather than the ICE agent storming the kitchen, that I think is preferable. And so my policy dictates that I am requested to bring you to the cafeteria where I will make those documents or those individuals available to you. And then the policy should also request that all documents be obtained in a copy, including a copy of the identification of the officer. So that, again, the individual can say, my employer is requesting that I make copies of these documents and that I have a copy of your credentials. So that's a policy related to enforcement action for an individual, whether an employee or a customer. I think there should also be a policy that relates to if an ICE agent, who's usually at that point a member of Homeland Security Investigations, appears with a notice of inspection. And a notice of inspection is a request for all of the I-9 documents and then often related payroll. And the policy should make clear that the organization does not waive, so that right after the subpoena and the notice of inspection, there's this ability to sign that you waive the 3-day notice requirement. The policy should say, we do not waive our 3-day notice requirement. We will provide documents as requested on the date required. And so there should be a 3-day window during which the organization can gather all the documents and provide the requested documents. ICE will often say, it would just be easier if you give them to me now. I'm not going to let you make any corrections to them. I'm going to fine you more if you make any corrections to the documents. So just give me the box now, then I won't be back. I'll just take it with me. I recommend you not do that, and that your policy say that you wouldn't do that. But in the process of making this policy is a good opportunity to make sure that your I-9 storage is apart from other documents, so that should this happen, should you have a short period of time to respond, many other documents aren't being swept up that don't need to be provided. And then also to consider what documents are you keeping with the I-9s, and do you need to keep those documents with the I-9s? One of the most frequent errors I see on I-9s is over documentation. And it's actually a finable issue for somebody to have kept an A, B, and C document where they only needed to have kept an A or a B and C document. So I don't want to get too deep into I-9 compliance right now, but I think right now is an important time to do an affirmative audit of your I-9s. Make sure you have what you need to have, but haven't over documented, because that also can create issues.
Kind of related question. So, Emily, I-9 notice inspection kind of focuses more on the employees, but I can imagine that it's kind of related to Rick's question. So, there are some organizations that provide services and have like members, and then that information is sensitive and may contain like the citizenship information. Could DHS/ICE demand like that information without judicial warrant, for example, in the course of like inspecting like I-9, the employees?
So I don't believe that ICE has the authority to request those documents. ICE does have authority over the immigration form 9 as it relates to employment verification. But I even question on these subpoenas many of the other documents that they are saying are related to the I-9, but certainly a list of volunteers, a list of board members is irrelevant to the I-9. And so those should not be provided. But for that reason, I caution what you keep with the I-9s, because should they just sort of be in the same file cabinet or connected somehow to the I-9s, they may make their way to immigration.
Great. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I've had that question asked related to non-employees and keeping of immigration status. And my recommendation is not to inquire or to keep immigration status for individuals affiliated with your organization when it's unnecessary because they're not employees. I think it's often done very well-intentioned. Like, we have a great tradition in the United States of sharing our ethnicity. And, my fourth grader did a whole project on her, heritage and where she came from. But I think we're going to have to reconsider how we do that.
Great. Now let's talk about kind of training. So because the reality is, let's say that the CEO or the highest person, the leader of organization, may know all these rights, but that doesn't mean that in reality, like that person will be at the reception, at the front desk, or encounter ICE officers like every day. So what are the things that the employers could provide for volunteers, staff, employees, a board member who are actually at the physical entity buildings like every day?
So I think this policy, as written, should then be shared with anyone within the organization who might have contact with immigration. And then especially for those who might be sitting at a reception desk or at a front lobby, I think some extra training on how to interact with an ICE officer in addition to this policy would be important to have. Conversations about, this is our policy, and this policy stands even though you likely will encounter an officer who may act with great authority, speak with lots of authority, give you little opportunity. Please, respectfully rely on this policy, provide this policy. I think the policy, again, should be used as a source of like comfort. People like knowing what the boundaries are, and what the structure is. And so I think it would be of help to share it with as many people in the organization as possible, with some additional training for those who would be the ones implementing it. I also think those who are the point of contact should take that responsibility seriously. So make sure that the person who is the point of contact knows they're the point of contact and that they would be available to answer. And if it doesn't seem like that person will consistently be, then to have some alternative names as part of the policy. And that individual knows how they're going to respond and whether they're going to make themselves physically present as quickly as possible.
So let's focus a little bit on the employee. Let's say that, I'm just imagining a restaurant and that there's employee being detained by immigration authority. We don't know, employer doesn't really know. I mean, for example, like because employee had work permit, so there's nothing that's wrong from employer's perspective, but then still ICE detain the person. What are the things the employee could do, but without getting into more this individualized, this particular individual person's kind of immigration case, for example?
Yeah, so what could the employer do to assist their employee? These are such hard circumstances, because very often when I've encountered this, it's been an employer who has a long-term relationship with an employee who they care about very much, and they think this is extremely unjust that the person has been taken away, and often it is, and sometimes there actually was a removal order that could be effectuated. But in either case, I think the employer is not the best person to be the direct advocate for the employee at that time, because there's just a necessary, unfortunate conflict at that time, because maybe as much as the employer believes that this person was work authorized, they weren't. And so the employee is in a situation of not really being able to share honest information with the employer, or they're sharing information with the employer that puts the employer in a difficult position. I have a situation right now where I feel very confident that that's not the case. I think that the employee absolutely is work authorized with no complicating factors. And I still think that the employer's best course is to find an independent advocate for that employee. So I think knowing what resources you would make available for the employees is important to have, whether, that's a list of nonprofit organizations, whether that's a link to the American Immigration Lawyers Association, but have some resources available that you would provide rather than trying to directly be the advocate for that individual, unfortunately. An employer may be asked to do something like write a letter in support of a bond. Those are obviously individual decisions about whether an employer would want to do that. I know I often ask employers to write letters in support of an immigration bond. So there gets to be complicated lines there.
Got it. How about your thoughts about kind of responding or preparing in this climate as sort of like individual entities rather than groups, or do you think they might be better to form, whether it's coalition or just like the audience that we have here, kind of association, kind of prepare the response together? What are your thoughts?
So I think having organizations and coalitions that are able to advance a policy or a advocacy position is ideal. For example, when the sensitive locations memo was revoked and now hospitals are no longer sensitive locations, each individual hospital, I think, was trying to figure out what their policy would be. And then you might have seen there was an NPR piece that the New Hampshire Medical Society came forth and had a policy about what they recommend. And some of the larger hospitals joined in that piece and talked about requiring a judicial warrant. I think that was very helpful to smaller community hospitals and saying we will follow suit with the larger organization and with our medical society in requiring a judicial warrant. I worked in Colorado for a decade, and the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado did a lot of advocacy work about temporary visas, about ICE enforcement within certain communities, because it created a culture of fear where they weren't able to do their work often. And that group had significant power within the legislature, whereas an individual, woman with 3, trucks wouldn't have had the same power. So I really encourage organizations to join together to advance a position, especially when it has, an economic, a humanitarian, quality of living impact on the state of New Hampshire, and to advance that in the legislature.
Great. So kind of trying to wrap up this, and then we leave some time for questions. Emily, what are your thoughts at what will be like in the future, in the near future? I mean, obviously we don't know, but still, like, as an expert, and how to stay informed and current with the changes in immigrant enforcement policy. What are your suggestions and thoughts?
So I guess that kind of loops back to that prior question, is that I think it is helpful to join in organizations that are within similar industries so that there can be information sharing about what the enforcement action looks like. And then, hopefully a call to action about what could be done. I think the American Immigration Council daily has updates on their website about what's happening, and I go there to just sort of scan, okay, this state law is happening in Iowa, what's happening here, to get a sense of what are these daily changes that are happening, and it helps me see in what direction we're going.
Great. I mean, I have to say it's kind of difficult question because we don't know what's going to happen. And again, like if for now, the administration advertises as it's only targeting this criminal, non-citizens, but the reality is that's not actually true. And also, even if their main target is people with criminal record, I don't think realistically they can make that quota with focusing solely on people with criminal record. For the administration to achieve their objective, they have to go into the broader categories of immigrants. So that's what obviously we all have concerns over. But go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
No, I just was going to echo that and say that's really why I hesitated with that question, is because I have offered some reassuring pieces of advice to people so far in this short administration, only to be found too optimistic. And so now I'm really cautious about, I don't want to create fear. And I don't want to, create a sense of panic, but I also don't want to create a false sense of security where people do need to be vigilant. And I do think that the trends right now lead me to believe that there will be more aggressive arrests in the future than I guess had anticipated even a couple of weeks ago.
And remember that the president has signed an executive order and essentially ending, he calls it pausing, legal refugee resettlement in the United States. The president does have the authority to say, here's how many refugees this country will take each year. Currently it's 0. And I think that's a huge loss for the country and certainly for the state of New Hampshire. The same executive order did allude to potentially reopening refugee resettlement, but as I said, only if the governor and mayors affirm that they want it. And so when you look at the future, it could be very bleak, or it could be something where we can have an impact. Likewise, he's terminated the temporary protective status for Venezuelans. I don't know how many Venezuelans might be here in the United States, in New Hampshire, but if he does the same for other ethnicities with temporary protective status, it's a much larger number than people who are here as refugees. And not only would nobody else come in, but potentially those people who are here with protected status today could find themselves on that list of people who would be subject to deportation. And so you're looking to the future, that's a pretty grim potential.
Are there any state laws and rules that are in place that are interacting with the federal laws? And is there a way to mitigate it on the state level other than writing support letters for accepting refugees? Is there any way to mitigate this on a state level? What's happening on the state level?
So there are ways on the state level to mitigate the cooperation, especially between law enforcement and immigration and customs enforcement in terms of both 287G agreements and also honoring ICE detainers, which again are just requests to local jails to hold people for ICE. And there are several states who have those protections in place. There are also states that have protections in place in terms of discrimination against those with sort of non-permanent status like DACA or TPS, and whether they can protecting them from discrimination in hiring. I don't know that we have the political will to get those things done in New Hampshire.
There were 2 kind of relevant bills in the legislature this session already. One would have eliminated the New Hampshire Office of Health Equity, which is the home of the refugee program. That appears to be headed toward being inexpedient to legislate, or at least retained, probably not going to pass. So that's a state action that is protecting the refugee program. There was also a bill in House Ways and Means to strip the nonprofit status from any organization that aids in what they call the resettling of illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants. That also appears to be headed to not pass. So there are actions in the legislature, really vehemently supported by a handful of pretty conservative folks that would make all of this harsher and harder even for the traditional resettlement activities.
And And is there the reason why companies should know about the Lake and Riley Act and how that pertains to enforcement at all? SangYeob, do you think they should be aware of it?
So I think, and Emily, feel free to jump in too. So I can Riley Act does provide, it doesn't provide additional basis to deport a person, but it provides this mandatory detention. Number one, there are many things that this act does, but mandatory detention for people who have been charged or admitted to have committed crime, not just conviction, certain crimes such as like shoplifting, theft related. So that kind of puts, for example, a person who is in deportation proceeding to be detained mandatorily. What that means, person just cannot get out under the system. Now, it also does provide independent basis for states to challenge the federal government's action and policy of the detention and release, as well as a little bit of the refugee policy too. So it's a little bit unclear as to how this would actually apply in practice. I'm actually very curious to see how this would. I don't think we're gonna see a lot of actions during this administration in terms of the second part, because that I think the law is really designed for more anti-immigration states to challenge the pro-immigration federal government. So, but still, like we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm actually interested to see how this would play out in practice.
And Rick, you work with immigrants and refugees on a daily basis. I was just wondering, in your approach, how is this impacting immigrant communities? Because I've read that in Manchester, certain barber shops are not seeing any customers. Attendance has dipped in schools, so it's affecting communities. So what are you seeing?
Absolutely. The stress levels very high, particularly among Haitians. We're familiar with a family who are here as legal refugees from Myanmar, the Rohingya, who are, they're here, they're safe, they're legal, they've got their green cards, and yet they are so afraid of ICE raids targeting them that they feel less safe in their own home than when they're driving around. And so they're spending a lot of time in their car driving around. This is tragic. It's outrageous. And I think that kind of anxiety and fear and confusion is very widespread and unnecessary. And who knows how it's impacting people's ability to learn at school or even to function at the job that they thought was secure.
Emily, you alluded to if they're really ICE agents or you ask for there. So is there room for like vigilante citizens to pretend they're ICE agents and ask for these things, or is there room for like over enthusiastic anti-immigration people to take action?
I think that there's a certain level of emboldenedness that people feel who are anti-immigrant to act as ICE agents, whether they even are like purporting to be ICE agents or whether they just feel empowered to call local law enforcement or to ask people about their status. I think reports throughout the country of that type of anti-immigrant action established that unfortunately there shouldn't be room, but I think people feel that there might be room for themselves to act in that way. And so for that reason, even if someone is not actively showing a fake ICE badge, I think people should just understand that they don't need to share their immigration status unless they're presented with a judicial warrant, to do so, especially in certain places. Students don't need to share their immigration status with anyone.
the same time, sorry, go ahead.
I mentioned the piece of legislation that would have stripped nonprofits of their nonprofit status. That specifically had a bounty hunter provision in it that would have paid people, individuals, to rat out those nonprofits for working with undocumented, presume what anyone they suspected were undocumented illegal immigrants here. So there is that movement within the legislature to embolden bounty hunters. I hope nothing passes.
I have a question? Do judicial warrants have the location's address? I've heard of them showing one for other locations.
So depends on the judicial warrant. So it can be a search warrant, for example, like search warrant to search the premise of that usually may contain the specific address, but judicial warrant also may have the arrest warrant of the particular individual too. It may not contain the address of the person, but I think more important aspect is trying to see whether who signed the warrant, because if you see a judge, then there's a good chance that the warrant has been signed by actual judge, but I just cannot produce a document with a fake document with like put the judge title in front of their name and then sign the warrant. So that's really important because I'm trying to imagine that in reality, like ICE officer showing a paper, there's a fear, anxiety, whether from volunteer, staff, employee. So a kind of easiest way to check is the sort of bottom of the signature page and blog and see who actually signed that paper. Is it some sort of acronym, or is it officer, or is it like a magistrate judge or a judge, someone?
Okay. And there's been incidents of racial profiling in New Hampshire of people being asked, and there's a fear in people of color communities, and now they're telling their kids to walk around with IDs. What is your advice? Because it's an existing fear with BIPOC communities.
And I have to say that fear is real because so here's the reality. It's like, how do you determine who is undocumented or undocumented? Like we don't carry that on our face, right? Like the reality is like, like officers often say that we have received extensive training about how to determine, but those training really focus on how people look, how people speak, with accent or not. And in this climate, there's a quota. So from officers' perspective, like they really have to find a way to increase to, fill that quota. Otherwise, they could be reprimanded, like suspended, reassigned other cases. So I think this racial profiling, the concern is real. And also, just frankly, ICE officers will not be like hovering around, walking around, like Irish town or like Italian community. They will like the chance of them like walking around with he's Mexican community, like more Hispanic community, with like African community, to be more likely. So I think the racial profiling is like real. So one thing that like for U.S. citizens, it's difficult, right? Like, you have passport, but that doesn't mean that like people carry passport all the time. But at a minimum, like having a kind of the driver license obviously could be useful, but even though that in reality, the driver license doesn't prove anything about the citizenship. Now, for those who who are not U.S. citizens, but who are here like lawfully present, it might be safe for them to carry some document because under the regulation, the immigration authority may invoke the regulation to require a person to carry such document. I mean, that's kind of similar advice that colleges, universities have provided that, like please carry at a minimum copy of those documents to show that you are here lawfully present so that you don't have to, go through very like egregious and the extreme measure of the enforcement. But Emily, feel free to provide more. suggestions.
We're actually at time, but I really want to get to this question. What programs, if Emily can address this, and SangYeob, what programs are available to get this information to immigrant populations, support services, and how can we as individual citizens help these programs get the word out?
Our start. So we provide know your rights training, whether that's coming from our legal team, or we also have organizing team that goes out into the communities to provide such training. And that's where we obviously we have capacity issues. We only have a few people here, but then that's where like, we invite like more expert, such as like this event that we invited, and Emily graciously accepted this invitation. And we have Rick, who kind of share what is happening with when it comes to refugees and immigration in this state. So feel free to reach out to ACLU New Hampshire if you want to have more know your rights training for your communities, your entities. We will do our best to provide one.
And Emily, any last
So
advice?
heartened by how successful these Know Your Rights presentations have been across the country, right? I think the actions of ICE have been unsuccessful in creating mass arrests or panic in many places because so many people knew their rights and didn't come to the door in Aurora and all through the country. So I think that that's the best place is to get the Know Your Rights presentations as far and as deep as possible.
Thank you. Thank you all for all this information, and thank you for the participants for attending. We are going to share this recording as a resource for our members and the wider community. We're also going to send you some resources for businesses from the American Immigration Lawyers and other. So it'll be in a follow-up email for everybody that attended. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your expertise, and thank you for caring enough for our immigrant and refugee population.
Thank you.
Thank you.